Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Science for Life Symposium. We are now in session number 3 of all the panels today. Now, the session number 3 is called The Future of Global Health. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of our distinguished guests, knowledgeable scientists, as well as our VIPs. Please welcome Professor Trần Văn Thuấn, Deputy Minister of Health. A warm welcome to Professor Lê Quang Cường, Standing Deputy Chairman of the National Medical Council. We'd like to welcome senior leaders of the Ministry of Health and government offices who are present here with us today. We'd like to welcome Vin Future Prize Council members and prominent scientists, as well as distinguished scholars, Vin Group leaders. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this event, both offline and online. Ladies and gentlemen, Vin Future Prize is a prestigious global science and technology award with a commitment to science and tech that serves people. The content shared today by scientists in the seminar play a very significant part in human life protection, especially in the devastation of the COVID-19 pandemic. Vietnam is no longer a backward and stagnant country. We've been transforming and playing an increasingly important role in global science contributions. Now, to start this afternoon's event, we'd like to invite Professor Trần Văn Thuấn, Deputy Minister of Health, to the stage for his address. Vâng ạ, xin trân trọng kính mời giáo sư Trần Văn Thuấn, Thứ trưởng Bộ Y tế lên có đôi lời phát biểu ạ. Xin kính mời ông.
Kính thưa bà Lê Mai Lan,
Madam
Phó Thủ
Lê
tướng
Mai Lan,
Tập đoàn
Vice Chairwoman of Vin Group,
Giám đốc điều hành quỹ
and CEO of Vin Future
Kính thưa
Prize
các nhà khoa
Foundation,
học, các bạn đồng nghiệp,
my colleagues, ladies and gentlemen,
hôm nay
it is
tôi
my
rất
great
vui
honor
mừng
today to join
tới đây dự tọa
the
đàm
talk
Tương lai sức
on
khỏe
the future
toàn
of
cầu
global
của
health
quỹ Vin
hosted
Future
by
tổ chức.
Vin Future Prize
Lời đầu
Foundation.
tiên, tôi xin gửi tới quý
First
vị
of all,
đại
I'd
biểu,
like to
các
extend
nhà khoa học
my
và các bạn đồng nghiệp
warm welcome
lời kính
and
chúc
the
sức
best
khỏe
wishes for
và
your
chúc
health
cho
and a
tọa đàm
successful
của chúng ta thu được
meeting
nhiều
and
kết
talks
quả
to
tốt
all
đẹp.
of you.
Kính
Ladies
thưa
and
quý
gentlemen,
vị, ngành y tế Việt
Vietnamese
Nam
healthcare sector
đóng
is
vai trò
playing
quan
important
trọng
role
trong sự
in
phát
the
triển
development of
đất
the
nước.
country. In
Trong thời gian
the
qua,
recent years, we
chúng ta
have
đã đạt được những thành công
achieved a significant result,
có thể
which
kể
I
đến
can
một
name
số kết quả
as
nổi bật như
follow.
thứ nhất
First of all,
là công tác phòng chống dịch bệnh
COVID-19 pandemic
đạt hiệu quả,
prevention and combat
xác
has
định
been
tiêm
successful.
vaccine phòng COVID-19 là
We
một
have
trong những điều
identified
kiện quan trọng
that
để thực hiện thích ứng
vaccination
an toàn
as an
theo
important
nghị quyết
role
128
and adaptation to the decision number
và phục hồi phát
128
triển kinh tế xã
NQ
hội.
of the government,
Trong năm 2021, Bộ Y tế
and
đã tập
focusing
trung
on the
chỉ đạo
recovery,
mua,
socio-economic
nhập khẩu,
development in
tiếp cận
2021.
các nguồn
Ministry of
vaccine
Health
và tổ chức
has
tiêm
focus on buying, importing, and distributing the vaccine to all the people as soon as possible and as much as possible. The COVID-19 vaccination campaign has been the largest in our history and has been very successful. By the end of 17th of January 2021, 22 to be precise, Vietnam have received 209.6 million doses of vaccine, and we have vaccinated 168 million doses for people with 18 years old and above, and almost 100% for one dose and 94.7% for second dose, and has been implementing 16% for the third dose, the booster shot. For the children from 12 to 17, 91.3% have been vaccinated for first dose, and 74.5% receive the second dose. Vietnam is one of the top 7 country with the largest prevalence of vaccination in the world, and compared to WHO recommendation, Vietnam has hit the target 6 months before the deadline, and the government of Vietnam has decided to finish the third dose, the booster shot, by the end of the first quarter of 2022. Along with that, Vietnam has been receiving and implementing the implementation of the clinic trial vaccinations and research, and receiving the technology transfer, as well as applying the trial for the vaccine developed by Vingroup as well. Secondly, Ministry of Health is identifying as one of the spotlight in the digital transformation. By far, Ministry of Health is one of the top two ministry introducing 100% of the public services level 4 to the internet environment through the National Service Portal, together with the Ministry of Information and Communication, applying AI in the diagnosis as well as the traceability of the diseases. The healthcare network has been ready for connection, sharing medical information, and sharing with 11,000 clinics in the districts and 98 million medical records, and ready for non-paper medical industry. And especially just yesterday, the Prime Minister had chaired the online meeting to implement the proposal on developing the data application on population identification and identifying the electronic services for the digital transformation by 2025 with the vision 2030. And we are also implementing a pilot program for 10 million people around the country that using the ID card integrated with the insurance card. Number 3 is important outcome as the legal framework has been developed, including the law on HIV prevention and control. This is the only law by far had been submitted through just one meeting of the National Assembly, and then it's one of the 3 laws that achieve 100% of the National Assembly delegates approve. Ministry of Health is also implementing and accomplishing other law and sub-law document to create a legal corridor in the protection, care, and improvement of the population health. Ladies and gentlemen, even though the physical health of Vietnamese people have been improved significantly, the life expectancy has been improved. However, the care and protection as well health improvement has been facing challenges. So therefore, to achieve the target by 2025 is creating a modern, fair, and effective medical industry. We need to focus on the services that bring to the people with high healthcare quality. The people are living in a good environment, good for physical and mental condition, improve the physical as well as the quality of population, improving life expectancy as well. We need to focus on the following strategies. One is development and accomplishment of the healthcare industry, especially the consolidation and the accomplishments of the grassroots medical network, focusing on primary healthcare. Number two, promoting the preventive medicine and improving health and control the disease. Number three, improving the services on diagnosis, treatment, and reducing the burdens of new emerging cases like cancer, cardiovascular and the abolism. Number four is focusing on international cooperation and healthcare staff high quality. Number five, scientific development, especially the healthcare technology, information system. Number six, developing the pharmaceutical product, including the vaccine as well as the mRNA vaccination technology. In 2022, the healthcare industry will focus on the following target. One, we need to focus on our efforts on combating the pandemic COVID-19, especially with the new variants like Omicron, and to reduce the hospitalization and the overload of the medical system. We need to focus on the institutionalization and streamlining, developing the law on diagnosis and treatment, law on insurance, and especially on the legal framework to overcome the challenges, difficulty that we are facing at the moment. We will continue to promote and enhance the capacity, especially the area in the remote and difficult zone, promoting human resources quality and sufficient in terms of quantity and quality, promoting all the area of profession and the national government management in the communication, education, and international system, including scientific research as well. Well, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Minister and the Ministry of Health, I would like to congratulate Win Future Prize Award for your nominations and the selection of the excellent research that served the Vietnamese in particular and to the mankind in general. More than anything else, it is the right time for us to share our efforts, making a concerted contribution, our intelligence to overcome the disease and pandemic. I do hope that this is a kick-off for the connections of the world scientists with Vietnamese in scientific industry. Intelligence, great minds are our common weapon to fight for a better health and welfare for the population worldwide. I do hope that the talks today will bring more outcome for the government and the Ministry of Health in the protection and care of the healthcare of our population. On the upcoming of the Tết, which is the lunar calendar New Year in Vietnam, I'd like to congratulate you all good health, a successful year, prosperity year, and successful in life. Wish you a fruitful meeting today. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Trần Văn Thuần, for your address today. Ladies and gentlemen, To start off the panel discussion, we'd like to invite you to take a look at our screen for just a few minutes.
I'm declaring a public health emergency of international concern over the global outbreak of novel coronavirus.
Facing the COVID-19 pandemic, the human breath has never been so fragile. Up to this point, besides general preventative measures, vaccines are the most powerful weapon in the fight against COVID-19.
Science delivered that hope in the form of vaccines, which have undoubtedly saved many lives this year.
However, is vaccine coverage faster than the spread of coronavirus variants? How do we reduce the price of vaccines so that millions of people in low and lower middle income countries can get fair access to them? What technology will support the health of all mankind in the future to prevent the risks of the pandemic? Let's discuss in today's talk show with the world's leading scientists.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. Such a touching moment with images from the video just now. It's probably something that we've all, felt very strongly or emotionally about. We're going to go straight to the discussion about the future of global health following the video. And this discussion, we all hope, will be the solutions to current health problems around the world. Now, please join me to welcome Professor Chi Van Zhang to the stage to moderate this discussion. Sir, welcome to the stage. So Professor Chi Van Zhang will moderate the discussion, and he will introduce our panelists today. And to panelists, there will be mics on the sofa, and it's already turned on. So when you want to speak, feel free to use the mic on your sofas.
Okay, so good afternoon, and welcome to the Future of Global Health session in celebration of the Science of Life Symposium. I look forward to a stimulating and inspiring discussion on the outlook on global health. So first, I'm going to call up our panels. First is Professor Caitlin Carrico, who is Senior Vice President at BioNTech and also a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. And she is, of course, very well known for her contributions to development of mRNA technology for the COVID vaccine and has enjoyed many honorable prizes, including the Breakthrough Prize in Life Sciences and the Lasker DeBakey Prize, which are shared with Professor Drew Weissman, whom I would like to call up. Dr. Weissman is Director of the Vaccines Research in the Infectious Disease Division of the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania, also a pioneer in the mRNA vaccine development, and is an immunologist with his daytime job. And he also has been honored with many prizes and shared those with Dr. Carrico. And then next, I'd like to call Professor Peter Cullis, who's Professor of Medicine, Founding Director of the Center for Drug Research and Development at the University of British Columbia, Canada. Dr. Cullis has spent his life in studying nanoparticles, particularly fat nanoparticles or lipid nanoparticles, which is absolutely essential for the delivery of mRNA vaccine that many of you have in your arms up to date. And he's also been recognized with a number of honors, including the Canadian Briggs Galleon, as well as the Weber Lifetime Achievement Award. Welcome. And then we also have online Professor Varsha Karim, who's Associate Scientific Director of the Center for AIDS Program Research in South Africa, or CAPRISA. She's also a professor at the Columbia University and very well known for their work on prevention of HIV in Africa. She's been recognized with many awards, including the Gardner Award from Canada for Global Health. She is joined by her husband also online. Professor Salim Karim, also known as Slim, and he's director of the CAPRISA and also a professor at Columbia University, and he joined his wife in many of the landmark studies in prevention of HIV and is a member of the U.S. National Academy of Medicine. And then I'm going to call up Professor Vu Havang, well known to you already. He's professor of mathematics at Yale University and also have received multiple prizes in mathematics and is also director of VIN Big Data to help us think through.
Professor Chi, before you start your panel, please allow me the honor of introducing you. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Chi Van Dang is the scientific director of the Ludwig Institute for Cancer Research, the United States. He is a professor, a physician researcher, a renowned cancer biologist and hematologist oncologist. He is also a member of the National Academy of Medicine and the National Cancer Institute Board of Scientific Advisors. He is honored to receive the United States National Institute of Health Merit Award. So Professor Chi Van Dang, the stage is yours. Thank you very much.
So in this session, I hope that we'll get a nice glimpse of what global health will look like with the emerging technologies that confront health threats throughout the world. Questions will arise, will development of high-tech health technologies create a wider gap between rich and poor patients, rich and poor countries? How do we narrow this gap? And in confronting future threats of non-communicable diseases and emerging pandemics, we need science to be the conveyor of facts, such as the importance of wearing masks that we're all doing today. We also need science to anticipate and develop vaccines for emerging infections. Cancer and cardiovascular disease are still leading causes of deaths and morbidity. Education, healthy lifestyles, access to clean water, and nutrition are essential for prevention of diseases. The future is in our hands. It will result from the choices that we make and the consequences thereof. Human aspiration for wealth has social and environmental consequences. You've heard this morning about the need for new energy source and information technology or artificial intelligence to help diminish the effects of human behavior on the environment and health. We need to deploy science and technology to increase the health span, a healthy life, not just to prolong the lifespan of citizens of this world. As you've heard, I'm a cancer doctor and a researcher. Cancer is still a leading cause of deaths globally. Collectively, we confront 20 million new cancer diagnosed throughout the world, with 10 million deaths every year. Much of our research to date have focused on fixing the problems when it arises, but now it's critically important for us to focus on prevention. Smoking cessation has saved many lives from cancer. Vaccines against hepatitis and papillomavirus have reduced the burden of liver cancer and cervical cancer, but these are still not universally adopted. You'll hear a little bit about how the adoption of HIV prevention from the Koreans. Obesity and alcohol use increase cancer risk, so healthy dietary and physical programs are essential for prevention of cancer, and education is needed to incent healthy behaviors. Advances in precision cancer medicine, producing expensive medicines, have deepened the disparity gap between rich and poor patients, and as such, prevention, which is readily affordable, must be a driving force to reduce the threat of cancer in the future. Now let's imagine together 10 to 20 years from now, we're talking 2032, 2042, when readily affordable smartphones penetrate 90% of the world population, which is approximately now between 30 to 60%, and that there might be hubs, internet hubs throughout the world that can be fully accessed even in rural populations. Education in general and health education in particular will help be disseminated through the internet. Technological innovations will allow for smartphones as recorders of health and use of cheap, disposable biological sensors anticipated to be largely available worldwide. Sensors may permit detection of emerging infections. Advances in vaccine development will anticipate new infections and readily available off-the-shelf vaccine rapidly produced by centers scattered throughout the world, connected together by AI-driven informatics. Cancer prevention through ongoing smartphone-enabled education and early cancer detection is envisioned to be provided by novel technologies in the next 20 years. For example, nanotechnology may provide injectable diagnostic and therapeutic devices that can be deployed in high-risk populations. So with this aspiration vision, we now turn to questions for the panel. So I'm going to start out with a general question for any of the panel members. The first question is that we have witnessed over the years many different global pandemics, and I'm not going to go through every one of them, but we're in the middle of one at the moment. So today, people say that we would like to see other pandemics in the next few decades. The question is this true? Can we be optimistic for preventing and controlling such pandemics? So I'm going to open it up for the panel to volunteer to offer some answers to these two questions.
That's my
Yep.
line of research. So there have been 3 coronavirus epidemics in the past 20 years. It's a guarantee there's going to be more. We have influenza pandemics every 20, 30, 40 years. We have Ebola epidemics. We have multiple other epidemics. This is part of life. The big question is, how do you prepare for these? And for COVID-19, our preparation was we moved very quickly and made new vaccines. It still shut the world down for 1.5 years or 2 years. What I think the future is, and this is what we're working on right now, are developing universal vaccines against common pandemic viruses, influenza, coronaviruses, now. So they're available, they're ready to be used the next time a coronavirus pops up somewhere in the world. And instead of taking 1 year to make a vaccine, the vaccine is ready to go the minute it's needed.
Well, thank you very much. Other members want to also comment? Perhaps I have an off-the-cuff question for Professor Van. So we heard in AI that now it's been used for protein modeling, for protein folding prediction. Is it possible that we can anticipate changes in a spike protein in coronavirus through using computation to predict which of the mutations might give rise to effective spike proteins that we can anticipate to make vaccines ahead of time?
Yes, so actually I know a little bit about this because one of my friends is working for such a company. So they do use big data and in modeling new variants of virus, right? So the virus can give rise to different kind of variants, but there's a limited amount of variants that they can transform into. And somehow they do research on it and try to predict all kind of variants that can come up within the frame of time, and then develop, as Dr. Wiseman said, some sort of universal, vaccine for all these variants. And I'm hoping that such a direction of research can yield some result in recent time.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So let me turn now to the second question, which is for Professor Carrico. As we heard from the video, to date there are over 5 million deaths from COVID-19, one of the deadliest in history. So equitable access to safe and effective vaccines is critical to end this pandemic. Tell us a little bit about your invention of the mRNA and related vaccines and potentially how to make vaccines affordable.
So the messenger RNA is some kind of molecule which is very easy to make, and the technology which is used for vaccine development can be used also for other kind of product development which will save and treat different diseases. And as we know, with Drew together, actually at the beginning we did not want to license at all because we wanted that everybody can use the messenger RNA, this modification, what we produce, but we also learned that development will not happen because companies will spend the money for trial and all of this, and then that anybody can use, then they never start. So messenger RNA is something that is simple to make, and of course right now it took time because scaling up and making 100 or 1,000 of those or 100 million doses, or actually eventually it was 3 billion doses was made last year by Pfizer and Moderna. So it took time. And I believe that we learn, and in the next time when we need, it will be much less time is needed. And it is also important to emphasize that the technology to have detection, which actually during the HIV, when the HIV was a problem, took like, 1 or 2 years, just developed the technology to detect. And so we know, all of us, that the technology to detect the virus went very fast. The information was transferred very quickly. We have the internet. The vaccine was coming slower, but it is coming, and we learn. And then I am sure that Drew is also just mentioned, in the future it will be much faster and reach other countries much faster.
Right. So I'm going to turn to Professor Wiseman. I know that you've been championing some efforts, initiatives to address this particular question. Could you tell us about some of those efforts?
Yes, so that's been a passion of mine forever, as long as I can remember. But in the spring of 2020, I had been working closely with Thailand for many years, and they came to me and said, any vaccine made in the West would be years before it made it to Southeast Asia, and they weren't willing to wait. And the government was willing to fund their own vaccine. So we made a COVID-19 vaccine for Thailand. We put it into clinical testing. Then we made a GMP production site. So GMP are the conditions to make vaccines and drugs. It's a very expensive, complicated system. But we built production in Thailand. They're now in phase 3 trials. We've built production sites in South Africa, in Rwanda. We're looking at building ones in Kazakhstan, in Brazil, and other parts of the world where vaccine access is limited. I think this is critical because if you put the vaccine and the production in the hands of the local people, they will make the vaccines that they feel are necessary and are needed for their population. And they need that control in order to get the vaccines out quickly.
So could you just articulate a little bit on some of the lessons learned with the experience you've had over the number of years trying to do this, and what can we all learn from this experience?
Well, I joke, I started with a full head of hair, so there's a lot of lessons involved. Persistence, and Katie and I will go back 25 years talking about persistence. You cannot give up. You need to persist, you need to keep working at it, You need to identify the weaknesses in the chains, supply chains, production chains, distribution, and you need to address those early. And only by doing that can you fully make a vaccine that can be widely used and distributed.
So I'm going to turn back to Professor Carrico. So tell us, you've been working on mRNA vaccines for quite some time. What was kind of the magic sauce that you and Dr. Wiseman came up with, and what were some of the barriers that I'm going to turn to Professor Cullis to provide the solution?
Actually, I never wanted to make vaccine. I was working and making mRNA coding for therapeutic protein. I was working in neurosurgery, cardiology, and I want to treat those diseases. And when we worked together, and Drew was interested in, to make vaccine, and he demonstrated that the mRNA I was synthesizing is immunogenic. That was worried me because I wanted to use this mRNA for therapy. And then I didn't want the stroke patient to get even more inflammation. So then we started together to find out why this messenger RNA we are making is immunogenic, inflammatory, and we hope that maybe we can make it non-inflammatory. Of course, we didn't know that it's possible. And of course, when we realized that we can do it, I was very happy that so I can proceed and make therapeutic mRNA, which codes for therapeutic protein. And even in BioNTech, when I went there 8 years ago, my role was not vaccine. My role was to develop a different kind of mRNA product, which codes for therapeutic protein. So, it is the lesson that you never know that you are searching and investigating something and benefiting in other field. So, and that was the reason we made a non-inflammatory, the RNA, and turned out that it was much better vaccine than the RNA, which was the naturally nucleoside. Ours is also naturally, but it was the conventionally used more like say, and it turned out that it was very inflammatory, especially in human, and so that's how it happened.
Right. And of course, once you sort of figure a way out to avoid creating inflammation, you need a kind of how to deliver it to the right place. So I'm going to turn to Professor Cullis. So tell us a little bit about your work and the challenges you face and the applications of the results of your work.
Okay, it's kind of a long story. It goes back about 40 years. So I first got involved in this area. It's pretty apparent there's two major problems with medicines. First of all, we use small molecules like cancer drugs, for example, and they go everywhere in your body, and they don't go very reasonably specifically to the tumor. And so again, this is where delivery systems come in, that maybe we can package them up in a little carrier and have them go more specifically to the cancer to basically avoid those nasty side effects we all associate with cancer drugs and to be much more efficacious. And so we worked for about, 15 years in that area. We got 2 drugs approved by the FDA and the European Medical Agency in that area. And then for a number of reasons, we said, okay, well, maybe we can do similar things with bigger molecules. One of the reasons we use small molecule drugs is because the small molecules are molecules that they're really tiny, 500 molecular weight for people that are more on the scientific side. But they're the only molecules that can actually get inside cells to do something inside a cell. And so that's why we use these small molecule drugs. And so we thought, okay, maybe it'd be kind of nice if we could use bigger molecules, such as DNA and RNA, nucleic acids, to really employ the machinery that's already there in the cell. It's the machinery the cell normally uses, and so you have very natural solutions to problems of disease. So this was 25 years ago, and we first of all started working on a molecule called siRNA, small interfering RNA, to shut down a protein. And in this case in the liver, following an intravenous injection. It took us quite a while. We had a major collaboration with a company in Boston called Alnylam. It was a 7-year collaboration. We had any number of people involved. But anyway, at the end of that, we came up with this lipid nanoparticle formulation that allowed where we could actually silence genes, bad genes, pathogenic genes in the liver. And the product came out of that was approved in 2018. So it kind of proved the technology. Anyway, in the interim, we got contacted by Drew and Katie to say, okay, well maybe these things might be useful in other areas, because what we'd gone on and say, okay, if we can deliver this siRNA, perhaps we can deliver messenger RNA. But of course, we weren't working on vaccines either. We were doing that in the context of the liver and producing proteins in the liver. Anyway, so after being contacted by Drew in particular, they proved spectacularly successful vaccines. As I say, it was sometimes you have to have good luck in this business, and so that was very good luck, and everything went from there. We started to work with BioNTech, and BioNTech in turn was working with Pfizer, and so the whole thing came together in a nice way.
Yeah, so I think what this just illustrates the discussion is a convergence of different disciplines. You have a biochemist who was very interested in studying mRNA and how you can produce proteins for various purposes, stumbling on the fact that this creates inflammation. You turn to your colleague who is a card-carrying immunologist. There are very few of us doing that. And then, of course, you have mRNA that has to get inside the cell, and this is where your work really has converged and has produced the kind of vaccines that we now have all enjoyed. So this is really quite a successful, albeit you say lucky, but I'm not so sure it's all luck. But
it certainly takes a lot of collaboration, put it that way.
Yeah. So I have another question for you. So beyond vaccines, what are some of the applications of your technology for drug delivery that might have implication for global health?
I think the implications are massive, and I know that Drew and Katie can go on in this area. But the fact of the matter is, if we can co-opt the machinery in the cell to our advantage, the number of therapeutics that comes out of that is huge, and not just vaccines. But so say a baby is born and it's not producing a protein for, say, clotting blood or whatever it might be, the rare diseases. The possibility is there now to devise a new medicine for that individual, where you just get the messenger RNA that codes for the protein that they're missing, and then you have the liver express that in that individual, and that can be done very quickly. I mean, that's the miracle of these kinds of medicines, is that you can have it's like we went from getting the genome of the virus to having a vaccine in 3 months. That can be even reduced from that. So you can see you can get a very specific and personalized medicine for that individual very quickly in the areas of rare disease. And of course, you've got the potential for cancer vaccines. You can, as soon as we can get to the bone marrow, then maybe sickle cell anemia comes into focus. All of those disorders become much more approachable using this kind of technology. I think it's the third generation of pharmaceuticals after first generation drugs and second generation biologics.
Yeah, so you mentioned about personalized medicine or precision medicine, if you will. I think this really turns to Dr. Wu to comment a little bit about how information technology could help with that.
Yes, so so there's the trend now to have tools from big data and AI into medicine. And I tried to use this occasion to explain a little bit about this, because my experience is that doctors are still a little bit skeptical about this, the use of high tech in medicine, because we know medical science is one of the oldest science, and it is very personal. A doctor actually need to be very confident when he, say something about the patient. So usually people don't want the computer to be there and say something else, right? I mean, who are you and to teach me? So yeah, but AI is not about replacing doctor. It is about assisting. And the way it assists is that I can explain it like this. So usually we want to go to a good doctor, right? What is our definition of the good doctor? A good doctor is the one who have a lot of experience. Right? He see a lot of cases. He know how to put our case, close to one of the existing case that he knows, and he apply the treatment that he already used for that person. Now, all of that experience now can be found in the computer database, right? Because now we are able to store million records of patients. So actually, the doctor will not know only 1,000 patients that he had examined, but he can know another million ones. And so with the power of computer nowadays and very clever algorithms, we can go to that huge database and search for the patient which is the most similar to us or to the patient which came to the office. And then that will assist the doctor with the right treatment. And then that is, I think, a kind of assistance that we can dream about. And about, we also talk about inequality in medical treatment, like the gap between poor and rich. And we know that the good doctor go to good hospital. They work at expensive hospital, right? And only the rich people can go there. But with this assistance, we can even make less experienced doctor a very good one. And that probably, close the gap between the qualities of the hospitals. And that's one thing we try to do in Vietnam here with my unit at Vin Big Data, is that we bring these tools into local hospital, like in township with 20, 30,000 people. And then they have access to that, and then somehow the quality improves. So that's the way I think AI and big data can help quality service.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. So the Kareems have been patiently waiting. This question is for you. You've been working on HIV prevention and clearly has made a mark in Africa. But I want to ask you a question, is that you currently have a lot of experience in Omicron in South Africa, and just a few weeks ago, South Africa was the focus of the world's anxieties over Omicron. And now that the cases have dropped and mortality rate has decreased, could you share from your experience with HIV prevention and what you observed with Omicron and what kind of lessons learned?
Yes, a very good afternoon to everybody. So, there are many lessons that we have learned from the Omicron experience that has been helpful as other countries have had the virus and the variant introduced. I think for me, there are three key lessons, if I might share them. The first is that we begin to see with Delta and now with Omicron that the SARS-CoV-2 is difficult to predict. It's difficult because each successive variant is not being derived from the previous one. Each of them are being independently derived, and so it's very difficult. We would not have been able to predict the creation of Omicron or its mutations. Now, in the labs that we have in Durban, we've been growing both beta variant and delta variant, exposing it to low levels of antibodies to see what the mutations would be, to help us predict what the future mutations might look like, what the next variants might look like. But it turns out that doesn't quite work in that way. And so that's what we're beginning to understand, is the unpredictability of what we're dealing with. The second lesson for me has been the importance and the central importance of surveillance. Surveillance that enables us to identify variants, and we have a very active system of genetic surveillance where we sequence viruses to a very large extent in South Africa, capacity that was built during HIV. And what we have seen is that our surveillance systems, for example, in our hospital, we were able to share with the rest of the world, even before Omicron started spreading in other countries, that this virus is less severe. We were seeing that because we can tell based on what we've seen in Delta, where 2 out of every 3 patients with Beta or Delta required oxygenation or ventilation when they got to hospital. Whereas with Omicron, it's only 1 out of 4 of our patients admitted need oxygen or need ventilation. And I think finally, the lesson for us is that we've got to find a different way in which we deal with new variants. In this particular case with Omicron, what we saw was panic. We didn't see countries and agencies acting in a very rational way about new variants. I mean, South Africa was immediately penalized for sharing information and informing the world in a very transparent way about the discovery of Omicron in South Africa. And of course, what happened? We ended up with travel bans. And I mean, even now, the reason we are sitting here in our hotel room and not with you is because of the Vietnamese government rules that require us to be in quarantine and not there with you physically. When in fact we only have 2,000 cases of SARS-CoV-2 a day in South Africa compared to 1 million in the US. So I think we've got to find a more rational way, a more evidence-based approach way of dealing with new variants, because there are many more to come.
So it sounds like we're going to rely on AI again, but I'm not going to ask you a question on that one. More rational based. Well, thank you for that answer. So let me just turn now to imagine a little bit about what the future of health is going to look like. I gave you a scenario of imagine on what happens in 10, 20, and 30 years from now. We have, from my colleague at MIT, Professor Sangeeta Bhatia, whose the video will be shown, on what we can see in the future for healthcare in terms of technology.
Hi, my name is Sangeeta Bhatia. I'm a researcher at MIT who specializes in nanomedicine. In particular, what I'd like to tell you about is the potential role for nanotechnology to detect cancer earlier in patients around the world. Just to get started, I'd like to share with you that the global cancer burden in low and middle income countries represents about 2/3 of cancer deaths today and is projected to only increase over the next decade. The sad reality is that a child with leukemia is largely cured in a high-income country today and will die in a lower middle-income country. And this sort of fundamental inequality due to access to technology is one that I believe can be addressed by inventing new technologies that are focused on this challenge of global oncology. The Sustainable Development Goals for 2030 do address cancer here in the non-communicable disease category. And so this is part of the vision for 2030. Today, 50% of cancer deaths in developing economies are preventable with cancer vaccines, smoking cessation, and screening tests like pap smears. However, we've been interested in creating technologies that could address that other 50%. In particular, we're interested in the potential for earlier detection of cancer to increase survival. You can see in this data that across a wide range of cancers, earlier detection leads to longer survival. And we know in high-income countries that screening technologies like mammograms for breast cancer and colonoscopies for colon cancer can in fact have impact on long-term mortality. However, this requires infrastructure that may not be available worldwide. And so we've been interested in whether a technology could be developed that could be as easy as a paper strip, like a pregnancy test, or more recently, like an antigen test for COVID. So in this movie, what you'll see is we've created a nanotechnology, a nanosensor particle, which is 100 nanometers in diameter. So it's 1,000 times finer than a human hair. It's been injected into the bloodstream, and it's leaking into a surrounding tumor through the leaky vessels of a tumor. These nanosensors are designed to detect enzymes that tumors produce called proteases. Once these nanosensors are activated, they liberate a flurry of molecular fragments that are 5 nanometers. These molecular fragments are so small that the kidney can be leveraged to concentrate them and put them into the urine. It turns out the kidney is actually an excellent 5 nanometer filter and concentrator. So the dream that we're building towards is one where a patient would get a shot and wait 1 hour and do a urine test on a paper strip. You could visualize that paper strip with a smartphone and then even send that to a remote provider who could make a cancer diagnosis at a distance. This would potentially not require steady electricity or physicians on site as part of a screening paradigm. Now, in animal models in the laboratory, this is working exceedingly well. We also have a startup company that is in phase 2 clinical trials to try and bring this dream into reality. This is really just one example of a technology that I believe could be created to address global oncology. I'd just like to leave you with the idea that we need more diverse minds engaged in this activity, and not just the ideas of delivering existing technologies with innovative policies, but also creating innovative new technologies that can be delivered in developing economies. Thank you very much for your attention. Have a wonderful day.
So I was just going to fail to mention that Professor Bhatia is one of the very few people that's elected to all 3 national academies in the United States. She belongs to the National Academy of Science, Medicine, and Engineering. So one of the few people, and certainly I hope that her technology will ultimately benefit people worldwide. Now, we touched a little bit on precision medicine, and maybe Professor Vu can tell us briefly about the 1,000 genome project in Vietnam, and that's going to be followed by another video clip.
Yes, thank you. So the 1,000 genome project is one of the key projects at Vin Big Data that we started 3 years ago and just finished the database right now, like a month ago. And so the reason that we did it and Vin Group invested in it is that with the vision on precision medicine, right? So we knew that this is a trend in the world and Vietnam somehow have to follow at some point. And we know that traditionally the way doctor treat patient in Vietnam or patient go to doctor in Vietnam right now is just, you have some problem, you feel pain or you feel sick and you go there and we make some test and it turns out that you have some kind of disease and here's a medicine, you have to go home and take it and so on. And precision medicine or predictive medicine changed the way we think about treatment, right? So if a doctor make a test at the right time, then he can detect the potential of a patient to get a certain disease in future, right? So he can evaluate the chance that somebody get, certain type of disease like diabetes. And then he can suggest the patient to change certain, diet or exercise it or certain way of life to adapt to this situation. And then later on, it will prevent the patient to get that problem. And so in order to do that, then we usually do it through genetic testing. And that is something that, in the US or in Europe, it become very popular now, but in Vietnam, we are just starting. And so the reason we started this 1,000 genome process is, or this project is that to just found the base for this precision medicine in the future. And very luckily, with the participation of very young and talented scientists in Vietnam and the investment from Vin Group, we just finished that project 2 months ago.
Well, congratulations on completing it. Of course, this will require a lot of computational power, and we discussed in the previous session about artificial intelligence. So if we can prepare to show the clip from Professor Robert Green from Harvard University, which will touch a little bit on precision medicine and genomics. If we can.
Hi, I'm Dr. Robert Green, a professor of medicine and genetics at Harvard Medical School. And it's a pleasure to be speaking to you there in Vietnam about precision medicine and genetics. I'll go through some of the questions that you were kind enough to ask and respond to each one in turn. Precision medicine has come to mean many things. For some, it's genetics. For others, it's wearables. For others, it's the concatenation of large amounts of data from multiple sources in order to truly create personalized and more precise diagnosis and treatment for each individual human being. Now, I'm a geneticist, so I see precision medicine through the lens of genetics. And if you're asking, how do we collect real-world point-of-care data to feed the machine of precision medicine? I'd say the greatest challenge is actually the clinical data. The genetics is tough, make no mistake about it, but the clinical data is the hardest to collect, to pull out of medical records, to standardize, to code, and then to bring back in some sort of harmonization with the genetic and other types of technical data that you might collect. So to me, collecting phenotype data on human beings, what sort of medical problems they have, what sort of treatments they get, how they do with those treatments is the most challenging aspect of collecting real-world data for precision medicine. Precision medicine is a kind of buzzword and a kind of dream. It really is pointing to a future where we use data to drive the diagnosis and treatment of human beings. And we do so in a way that uses all of the data. It uses our complaints, it uses our various chemistries, it uses our DNA, it uses the family history and the nature of the treatments that have succeeded and failed in us before. So I believe precision medicine is an aspirational goal that we can all point to in Vietnam and around the world. Some of the earliest successes in precision medicine, of course, come in the field of oncology, where specific forms of cancer can be treated according to the mutations that you find in the cancer itself. But I think this is going to snowball into all sorts of other areas of medicine and is going to be a kind of goal that we can build on for decades to come. Medicine as it is practiced in the United States, in Vietnam, and really throughout the world is not evenly or fairly distributed. There are huge disparities in access to healthcare, in the way that people fund healthcare, and in the healthcare that some people get and others do not get. Precision medicine suggests a vision of medicine that is more oriented around prevention, that is more oriented around prediction, and that is more oriented toward keeping people healthy rather than waiting until they are ill in order to treat them. The grand vision of precision medicine means that we would actually spend less money, do fewer surgeries, and have a healthier population, and therefore spend less money. If you can spend less money on healthcare, then you can spread that around to everyone, regardless of their social status, their ethnicity, or their level of socioeconomic success. So some people might say, well, should we even be concentrating on genetics and other precision medicine technologies when there are already such disparities in healthcare around the world? And I would say, of course, we need to address basic human healthcare needs. That should come first. But I do think that scientific progress, including progress in genetics, Precision medicine and personalized care is something we need to continue to invest in. It will have dividends in terms of prevention. It will have dividends in terms of treatment. It will have dividends in terms of understanding disease and helping us all as a human race become healthier and healthier.
So you heard it, big data requires AI, and there's another video clip that sort of brings this together. If you can launch that video clip, please. While we're preparing to launch that, I'm gonna ask Professor Vu to think about answering this question after we see the video, which is the outlook for big data and AI in the next 20 years.
Nowadays, AI is no longer the future, but a current reality of our world, providing miraculous upgrades in the medical field. The integration of AI cancer care is leading to more and more breakthroughs. Doctors are able to improve their diagnosis. Enhancing connectivity, telemedicine and telesurgery offer people, especially those in disadvantaged remote areas, the opportunity to access advancements in healthcare. AI also helps to predict the probabilities of diseases and offering early treatment to dangerous illnesses, which can go a long way in helping us prevent future pandemics. What other miracles can AI contribute to the health of mankind in the future?
So, Professor Vu, what do we have to look towards in the future in the next 20 years? And what do you think the hospitals will look like with all this information technology being available?
Well, I don't really know how they will look like. I just want to talk about my dream, that how they look like in my in my dream. And so well, first of all, all the AI application is based on having clean and systematic data, right? And so that is something we have to take care of first. Say, like the data collecting at hospital have to be stored and labeled and categorized properly. And this is something that have been done in the US for a long time. But in Vietnam and for many developing countries, we are still in the middle of the road. And that's something I think have to be done very quickly in the future, in near future, in order, if you really want to apply AI or other technology, advanced technology in hospital, we need to have all this data storage and collection done properly and as soon as possible. Now, once this data is collected, there are many ways to make use of it. We already talked about finding the right treatment for the right person, right? So actually, I talked with you about that yesterday about clustering, right? So we have a big data set of patients and we can cluster them into groups. When each group of people have similarity in characteristic and can have similar treatment. And so when a new patient comes, then we can easily identify him or her in one of the group and find the right treatment for her. So another thing I can think of is the effect of like ADR, right? So the use of drug and side effect. So we know that for each disease we have many medicines, and choosing which one is a very important task, because you have to try it for a few months and it doesn't work, then you come back, or you have some side effect and you have to go to the hospital again. So this can be prevented if we have genetic testing in advance to tell, for instance, which patient should receive what kind of medicine. The other aspect of AI is that I can think it can reduce human error quite a bit. So we heard about this morning about applying AI in medical imaging. So we have a medical image and you want to read it and find, problems in that image. And human eyes can get tired pretty soon, especially in developing countries like Vietnam. People read 200 X-rays a day. So if you think, that's 10 times what we do in the US, 200 to 300. And so by the end of the day, a lot of doctors get really tired. But we have assistant from AI, which can assist in reading these images. Then actually we can reduce the error by a few factors. And that has been experimented here in Vietnam, but many other places in the world. And another thing, second thing up is the connectivity. So hospital can connect to each other, group of scientists or doctors can connect to each other, and patient can connect to, many doctors online, and that make treatment and diagnosis and advising much easier and with a higher quality. Yeah, that's my 2 cents about the picture.
Yeah, no, that's an aspirational dream to make that all happen. So let me now turn to an open question, which is that for the panel, what kind of activities can we anticipate to overcome challenges and accelerate success in global health? And maybe I will turn to the Kareems, given their work, which is pretty well known, on your thoughts on how do we come together globally to address global health.
Thanks very much for the opportunity. Greetings, everyone. And let me start by reminding all of us that when we're dealing with pandemics, it's about all of us, and it's a reminder of our interconnectedness and shared vulnerabilities. And to quote the WHO Director General, no one is safe until we are all safe. And I think COVID-19 has reminded us of that. HIV, we've had around for nearly 4 decades. And I think a lot of the rapid progress we've made in COVID-19 has been possible because of sustained investments in science and technology that were made that enabled rapid pivoting of diagnostic platforms, of clinical trial infrastructure, and enabled us to develop vaccines and therapeutics as rapidly as we have. So I think as we think about precision public health and pandemics and the many pandemics we're likely to see, given our interconnectedness between the humans, the animals and other living organisms and the environment, this investment is going to be really important. But I think we've also learned with COVID-19 the importance of national investments in technology development, whether it's diagnostics, therapeutics, or vaccines, so that we're not dependent on a few nations for the products to be developed. But I think we've also learned that there's no one size fits all. And that, for example, in HIV, we have 1.5 million infections that took place just in the past year, which is 3 times the number of the 500,000 that the UN Declaration on Ending AIDS as a Public Health Threat said, 3 times higher. We still don't have a vaccine. We still don't have a cure. It's a reminder that we have many incomplete pandemics. And as we think about the future, we cannot abandon the incomplete pandemics of HIV, TB, Ebola, etc. But the important part around the 1.5 million infections is that 70% of those infections are in Africa. And in Africa, there's a very unique characteristic where young women, 15 to 24 years, have 4 times more infection and account for 25% of all the new infections that we see in the continent. And there's a disconnect between that challenge that we have and this key driver of infections in sub-Saharan Africa and what is available technologies. And so I just want to remind ourselves, even as we deal with pandemics, that we think about the local epidemics, what are the key drivers of those epidemics, and look for solutions so that we don't end up with a one-size-fits-all approach that doesn't meet the needs of every country. And lastly, I want to say an important lesson that we've learned from HIV is that of global solidarity. Today, AIDS is a chronic condition, moving from one that was inevitably fatal to one that's chronic and manageable. And that was possible because of the discovery of triple antiretroviral therapy. But it wasn't until 2002, with the establishment of structures like Global Fund for AIDS, TB, Malaria, like the US Presidential Emergency Program for AIDS Relief, and the work of scientists and communities, that we were able to realize this dream that regardless of where you are and you have AIDS, you have access to that medication. So the discoveries are an important first step. The real value of those discoveries is when we can get it to the beneficiaries of that product across the globe. And I'll hand over to Slim to see what else he'd like
just to say, yeah, I think for us, achieving and dealing with global health is fundamentally about ensuring that we do excellent science to find solutions. And once we have, we've got to convert that to impact, to making a difference in people's lives. And in HIV, we've seen how antiretroviral treatment and prevention efforts like the ones we've been involved with, you can be the poorest person in a village in somewhere in Africa, and you can access treatment. You can do so because of the Global Fund, because of PEPFAR, that those technologies have become made available. And I think that that's what we'd like to see, is the impact of science on making a difference in people's lives.
Oh, thank you.
Science is a public good, in other words.
So,
thank you.
Oh, thank you. Maybe I'll turn back to Professor Wiseman. Tell us a bit some lessons learned about connecting the dots globally that you've been doing, and what are some of the potential barriers that we could anticipate so that when the next problem come along, that those have been taken care of?
So the problem with connecting the dots is there are so many dots. And ultimately, the approach that we took is we ignored a lot of the dots that we had no control over. So there are some governments that have no interest in vaccines. But we've tried to get vaccines into the hospitals, into the pharmacies, to avoid the governments. So you have to evaluate every situation and figure out what dots you have to connect to make things work. And you have to accept up front, you're not going to connect everything. You're not going to make a perfect situation everywhere you go. You have to make it good enough so you get the drug to the people and you help people, and you worry about making it better later on.
Great, thank you. So I think that was coming to our essentially last question. So if you could, now we can turn to questions from the audience as well as questions online.
Thank you, Professor Chivandang. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now time for us to start the Q&A section. Again, for this panel, the Q&A will be held offline as well as online. We'd like to start this panel 3 Q&A session with the offline questions, and then we'll follow up with those with the online questions. Now, for those that are online, kindly type in your questions into your Zoom chat, and we will collect them and ask them to our panelists today. So, offline questions first. May I see a show of hands, the people that would like to ask a question, please? I think I see several hands already, and then I also see several hands at the back. Would we have a mic to go over to that side first, please?
So I'm Hưng from the healthcare system. So there is no doubt that the precision medicine will play an essential role for the modern healthcare. And that's why at Vinmec Healthcare System, we are at the very first step to implement the precision medicine at Vinmec. However, we recognize that the Vietnamese based data for medicine in Vietnam are very limited. So could you give us an advice of how we can rapidly and use the data from the developed country to implement the precision medicine for Vietnamese population? Thank you.
Anyone? Answer the question? It sounds like it's...
I think it is you, because they ask for how to use data from hospitals from developing countries. Like the Vietnamese can make use of that data. So I think probably you have more experience in that area.
So the question is, how do you use these data? From
Available, or there's the way that people can help, people around the world can help us with this kind of data.
Yeah, I mean, I think you touch on some of these topics, which is, getting the right data to be available so that there's some uniformity in collecting data wherever it's coming from. Then I think there are a lot of efforts, your effort or other efforts around the world, that actually can utilize those data to really benefit, taking care of patients.
He's more like asking about sharing, like when you have the data,
So it depends. I think that, in the United States, it's a little bit different because we have if you want to call it, an issue of competing health systems. And within Philadelphia, for example, there are at least 3 major health systems that are competing with each other for market share. And so there's the willingness to actually to share data or share methods of analyzing data is really kind of gotten in the way of the competition. However, I need to point out, though, is that we do have a Medicare claim system where you actually can get it reimbursed by the government, and you do have to deposit data in a certain way to get reimbursed. So some people actually have been able to exploit that for research purposes and potentially for decision making. Maybe in other countries there may be more willingness to share the data. I'm going to just ask you, how much do you anticipate the hospitals in Vietnam is going to share data with each other?
That part I don't really know. I mean, they do share research, but I don't know how much data people are willing to share.
Yeah, I think this is a huge problem. As you pointed out, in the areas where it's for medicine is for profits, then you have competition. In single-payer systems, such as we have in Canada, you have very conservative groups that guard that data, and really you have big problems getting it out. So they have a lot of data, but accessing that data is extraordinarily difficult. I tried one time for 3 or 4 years to get data out on diabetes treatment in British Columbia, and I didn't succeed, even though we had adequate funding and everything else for it. I think this is a problem around the world. It's a problem of privacy in the single-payer systems, and right now it's inhibiting sharing healthcare data.
But presumably you can use anonymized data to at least find patterns, presumably, right? Then you can use those patterns to deal with your own population of patients.
That's correct in theory, but as soon as you start to include, say, genetic data or things like that, then there's always the questions that come in. I really do think we need to address this in a fundamental way, that it's a very important thing for at least individuals to be allowed to share their data, and perhaps, big data solutions like blockchain, trust, etc. May be a way to go forward with that, but it is an area that really needs to be solved.
Thank you, professors. I think we have one more slot for an offline question. There's a gentleman over there. Can we give him the mic, please?
Thank you so much, Professor, for such awesome work for inventing mRNA COVID-19 vaccines and saved many lives over the world. And my name is Ding. I am allergist and immunologist from Vinmec Healthcare System. And one of my question is because of daily practice, and I have to treat my patient with autoimmune diseases and other kind of allergic diseases as well. And so I would like to ask Professor Carrico, and what is our opportunity to get mRNA therapeutic for such patients like suffer from autoimmune diseases and allergic diseases? Thank you so much.
So the you meant that using messenger RNA for autoimmune diseases, not the vaccine. Yes, so that at the BioNTech, we published last January, a year ago, that some autoimmune disease, in that case we used multiple sclerosis and identified the autoantigen, and we used this messenger RNA coding for the autoantigen repeatedly applied to the animal and generate tolerization. It was very important in that case we didn't use the LMP because the lipid nanoparticle contains one material which is actually the adjuvant. So this therapy for autoimmune disease was IV injected, not intramuscularly like the vaccine, and this was tolerization, and it went actually IV, and it was in the animal, the autoantigen coding mRNA was delivered to the spleen, and repeated injection resulted tolerization. And so in the future, BioNTech will proceed and prepares the clinical trial.
Thank you, panelists. I'd like to address your attention to our online questions, and then we will go back to ask some more offline questions. So the first online question we have is, I'm the Assistant Professor Chim Deng of Nanyang Technological University of Singapore. I hope to hear the panelists' opinions on 2 points. The first point is, what are your thoughts on what developing countries need to focus on to make these countries more prepared for future global health challenges, including, but not only future pandemics, but also chronic aging diseases? That's the first. The second is, what are your thoughts on the role of manpower, for example, young scientists, healthcare workers, training in this preparation? Thank you. So that's the first online question we have.
Okay. Open up for the panel.
So there's really two elements to this answer. Certainly for pandemic diseases, the two necessary things are, one, screening, so you can identify a new disease before it spreads. And the second is rapidly developing vaccines and therapeutics. All of those require infrastructure. So you need the ability to screen samples, to detect samples, and then you need the ability to make vaccines and make therapeutics. And all of that is infrastructure. You have to put the money into building the entities, building the drug production, building the research to make the drugs and make the vaccines. Unfortunately, in the end, it's money. I think that starts it, and once you've got the money, then having a young research force with interest in studying these things is absolutely critical.
Yeah, I think there's something here that we may want to talk about, like public policy point of view, because what I realize is in the whole world, right? So we are in panic. And most of the decision is made like a little bit in the sentimental way, but not based on statistical evidence. And so somehow we are not prepared for the disease or the epidemic in that way, like what to do with something happen. And so with all this data now and the experience, I hope that we will prepare more to have, say, like mathematical model for things happening, and at which level we have to do what, not only about medicine, but about, the public policy. And that would be hugely beneficial for everybody.
And so how is South Africa prepared for the next big problem?
Well, I'd like to say that that's a very good question that was asked, because to me, I've been involved in preparing for pandemics in South Africa for over 33 years. I used to chair the committee that oversaw preparations for the flu pandemic, and then the elimination of polio, for example. So to me, what's essential, if I can just comment on three things. The first is you have to acknowledge that you've got a problem coming up. You've got to have your politicians, your officials in your government, the private sector, everybody's got to acknowledge we have a problem that we have to prepare for. And that taking that step of saying you want to prepare is a critical step, because then things follow. Because then from there, you set up the surveillance systems, you set up the systems to ensure that your healthcare can cope with it. But then you've got the additional issues to deal with around that, which is your public health infrastructure, and then finally, all of your scientific capabilities to bring to bear. So it's really about, preparing, ensuring the health system with surveillance is in place, ensuring your public health systems are ready to cope, and then finally ensuring your science is ready. And all of that takes many years to prepare. None of that is done overnight.
And I would add, you need public trust. And for that, you need open science communication with all the uncertainties, all the knowns, all the unknowns. And if we don't take the public with us, then we end up with products and interventions with hesitancy or anti-position on it. So I think that communication piece with the public is critically important for trust and adoption of interventions.
Could you also comment on your training for some of the activities you've done, particularly some of the clinical trials you've done, to have the right training of individuals to be able to handle that?
Actually, it's a critically important part of what we did. Back in 1992, Kuresha and I, together with colleagues at Columbia University, established a Fogarty-funded training program. That program, over 22 years, has trained 600 scientists from throughout Southern Africa. I mean, we have at least a dozen large HIV and infectious disease research units. Most of them are run and involve our previous fellows. That one program provided the science base on which much of our HIV research is built. Whether it's the president of the Medical Research Council, whether it's directors of major research institutes, they come out of that program. That investment is a long-term investment, but you've got to make that investment early so that as we say in Africa, when is the best time to plant a tree? Right? It's 20 years ago. Well, if you didn't get that chance to do it 20 years ago, at least do it now so you've prepared 20 years from now.
Great, thank you for that.
Professors, panelists, we are at about time. And to the audiences today, there are a number of other questions and a lot of very, very enthusiastic hands that are being raised. We encourage the discussions and the questions to continue even after the panel discussion is over. All right, so let me conclude this panel discussion. So thank you, distinguished guests. Thank you, Session Chair, Professor Chivan Deng, for holding this wonderful, interesting discussion. Thank you, our panel of scientists today, joining us both offline and online. And ladies and gentlemen, just a reminder, VIN Future Prize honors science and technology that services humanity. The first award ceremony of the VIN Future Prize this time will be announced tomorrow, January 20th. So please join us to find out the winner of one of the most valuable prizes in the world. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for all the wonderful discussions. Stay safe and goodbye. Have a great evening. Thank you very much.